All right. Hi, and welcome, everyone. My name is Philipp Rudiger. I'll be giving you a talk about using Panel to rapid prototyping, data exploration, and deployment in Jupyter. So this talk is a little bit of an experiment. On Saturday, I decided it would be good to build a slide template for Panel, and that's what you're seeing. So let's switch straight into the presentation. So this presentation is a bit of a hybrid. It's, first of all, an appeal to kind of reduce friction when you're exploring data, when you're trying to deploy data. And I'm going to try and get across my vision for what that looks like using the tools that we build at Anaconda. So first of all, I'm Philipp. I'm the HoloViz team lead at Anaconda. I'm the creator of Panel, GeoViews, HVplot, and Lumen. Some of those you'll see in this presentation. And I'm also a core maintainer of Bokeh and Datashader. But really, I'm presenting work by the entire team. And so we have a team within Anaconda that kind of builds these tools. But our primary job is consulting. And so we try to enable people to use these tools to share their insights, rapidly gain insights, and then distribute those within their teams or to the world. And so this team consists of James Bednar, Simon Hansen, Maxime, who's going to be giving a talk next door right after me, Sophia Yang, John Luke Stevens, and Mark Skov-Madsen, and of course the entire Panel and HoloViz community. So you might be asking, what is HoloViz? Even if you've heard of it before, it's a little bit confusing. So the idea behind HoloViz is to provide a unified set of tools that work well together to build high-level visualizations and to go from data exploration to deployment. So we're going to see that here. Oops, what just happened? So that consists of a variety of tools. That includes HVplot, HoloViews, Panel, Lumen, GeoViews, Datashader, and Param. It's a handful. Don't need to worry about it too much. We're primarily looking at Panel today. And so again, the core philosophy behind HoloViz in general is to kind of empower data scientists and reduce friction when doing data exploration and when kind of trying to share that data. And so that comes with a nice little tagline, which is shortcuts, not dead ends. And so the idea is you want to be able to quickly go from data exploration, you want to quickly get something on screen, you want to be able to iterate quickly. But then at the end, you still want to be able to tweak it, you still want to kind of customize it the way you want, and that's where there's no dead ends, right? You can always kind of dive in deeper. So HoloViz really has two main goals, which is A, to reduce friction when you're iterating, and B, when you're trying to share that, you also want to reduce friction. You don't want to go between teams to kind of, when you're going to production, you just want to be able to kind of empower the data scientists or the person working with the data to put that into production directly. And so we're going to explore kind of how I envision, or our team envisions, an exploratory workflow to work, right? And so a big part of that is basically exposing the power of the PyData ecosystem, right? Python is so powerful because there is such a broad ecosystem of tools, and we want to allow people to use those tools, right? They want to use the tools they already know. They just add a little bit of wrapping of Panel around that to kind of add interactivity, to lay out your application, to put a nice template around it, and you want to be able to prototype quickly. You want to prototype in a notebook, usually. We, of course, also allow people to kind of iterate in an editor and kind of have auto-reload features like you just saw in the TypePy talk. And then when you're finally happy with it, you want to go to deployment. OK, so iteration cycles should be fast. That's really the core of why Jupyter and notebook interfaces in general have become so popular, right? You want to tweak some code, see the output immediately, tweak it again, and that's really the power behind it. And so that doesn't matter if it's Jupyter or VS Code notebooks or Colab or Anaconda notebooks, which I'll briefly show in a bit. And so next, you should be able to use the tools you love, right? You already have a bunch of code in Matplotlib. You have a bunch of Plotly code. You still want the interactivity that comes with Plotly, or you want the interactivity that comes with Vega. And so you should be able to use that. That means you should be able to just drop these tools into Panel and use them, right? Whether that's an Altair plot, a bokeh plot, JECGL, eCharts, HoloViews, Matplotlib, Plotly, or more recently, Vizu, which I think is kind of cool. So you can use any of these tools, and they'll just work, and their interactivity will work. Beyond that, though, even if these tools span entirely different ecosystems, right? The Jupyter Widgets ecosystem is a super powerful ecosystem. And so if you want to use those tools, those also should just work. That's kind of part of the philosophy. Martin, who's right there, actually built React-on recently. It's a super cool library, also a very intuitive API built on React. And if you want to use that, great, it just works. You can just drop that in. You have to install some compatible libraries for compatibility, but that works. You can use Jupyter Widgets. You can use more complex libraries such as IPGani. I don't actually know how to pronounce it, but yeah, any of these tools, you drop them in, they just work, right? So that's really, really powerful. You just use the tools you already know and leverage those. Next, you should be able to add interactivity quickly. And you shouldn't have to write callbacks. We live in a world of kind of reactive workflows, and so you should be able to use those, right? So here we're going to go through a very simple example of adding interactivity. We define two sliders, basically two widgets as inputs, and then bind those to a function. So that's kind of the core API that we provide to add interactivity to anything in Panel. And so here we're binding this number to this function, which basically just multiplies this string by that number, and then gives us an output. Similarly, we bind another function, which kind of returns a changing font size to another widget, or the other way around, we bind the widget to that function. And then whenever internally we kind of figure out this depends on that, and so you should re-render or update that parameter when this changes. So here we can see that. When I drag the slider here, we can see the output changes, right? Very simple approach to adding interactivity to your applications. There's no custom APIs. You don't have to write strings to kind of define callbacks. It's just bind function to parameter and return the result, and that renders. Or you bind it to some components parameter, and that updates. Next, you should be able to use the APIs you already know. You shouldn't use new APIs to kind of transform your data. You already know pandas. Use it, right? And so to add interactivity to pandas, we've developed a wrapper library around pandas, resize, that allows you to build pandas pipelines, but inject parameters, inject widgets to control that pipeline. So that's actually what Maxime is going to talk about in a bit, but I just want to briefly mention it. So here we define, for example, so we have a data set of all the wind turbines in the US. We want to know kind of per state or per year or per manufacturer or per model, how many are there. We write a little pandas transformation chain number of operations here. We group by some variable. Here that's the grouping is defined by this widget. And then we take the top n records out of that, right? And so if we do that, we automatically get back a pipeline that re-renders itself, that renders the output. And so when I change a widget, this pipeline reruns, it renders the new output, I get the new results, right? So if I change that, we get the new result. Yeah, so that's kind of my 4 principles for a powerful exploratory workflow, right? You should be able to iterate very quickly. That's why notebooks are ideal, but editors with an auto reload feature that shows you kind of the results are great too. You should be able to use the tools you already know and love. You should be able to add interactivity quickly and naturally, ideally through reactivity. Sometimes you still need callbacks, that's okay. And finally, you should be able to use the APIs you already know, right? And so that's, I think that really, if you have all those things, you have a pretty natural workflow to add interactivity and to begin thinking about sharing your results with people. And that's what we're going on to next. Publishing. You're now happy with your result. You've iterated enough. You want to share this with your boss or your team or the world. And that transition also needs to be smooth, right? Panel means that your exploratory code still works, right? the code you've written still works. You don't need to change it. Maybe you add a template here or there to make it look prettier. You change some styling. Good. But everything else, the core logic should still work, and you shouldn't have to kind of change anything there. Next, you should be able to preview your application. Again, while you're iterating on the individual components, the iteration needs to be fast, but also when you're kind of tweaking the precise look and feel and the layout of your application. That should also be fast. So you should be able to preview your application before you deploy it. And finally, you should be able to publish and share it with others effortlessly. Again, there shouldn't be another team involved that kind of manages your Kubernetes cluster and you don't know. You got to talk to them to set it up. All too much friction. You should empower your teams to do that. And so we're now going to jump into the more interactive part of this. We're now in, I'm going to increase the size a little bit here. We're now in Anaconda notebooks. So this is really just to demonstrate kind of this whole end-to-end workflow and what that can look like, right? So here we have an application built inside a notebook. It's kind of, I don't know, it loads some stocks, it calculates the portfolio, it allows you to change kind of the allocations of your portfolio, and then recalculates the kind of some plots based on that. The details aren't too important, really just focus on the idea kind of you build something in a notebook, and now you want your kind of, okay, I'm happy with this, I want to share it, I've added it to a so-called panel template, and now I can preview it. So for that, we kind of copied the Volaz preview extension. That is a really excellent tool to just kind of preview an application before it goes into production. So let me increase the size a little bit here so we can see the full application. Yeah, relatively simple application still, but you can see the idea here, right? You can we can now go back into here and say, ooh, I actually don't like this color. I want to change it and see the preview again. Fine, you're done, you're happy, this is the dashboard you want to share. We now close the preview, and now we have, in Anaconda Notebooks, we have this deployment feature. So this is launching pretty soon. But again, the concept is there should be a deployment feature. There were some open source solutions for this, such as CDS dashboards, which were kind of abandoned. We really want to see kind of also open source solutions like this emerging that allow you to deploy it to your cloud infrastructure easily. So let's say here, I'm going to give this a title, right? I'm going to call this Portfolio Analyzer 2. It's already included the notebook here with the application in it. It's associated the environment from the kernel with this deployment. And now I hit publish. So it's now going up and actually creating a so-called Conda project, bundling this application into a standalone thing that can be deployed. So Docker container is pretty heavy. Conda project is kind of the successor to Anaconda project. If you've ever heard of it, it never really caught on. But the idea is to bundle your application together with the commands to launch that application and the environment so that if you download this project, you simply run conda project run. It installs the entire conda environment and runs the application. So that's what's happened here. This is now running on the cloud infrastructure, right? Yeah, so this is now deployed. 3 clicks, we've gone from our application in Notebook to a deployed application that you can now share with folks, right? You can send this out. We'll work on kind of privacy features and so on down the line. And yeah, just to double check here, all the interactivity should still work. I should be able to kind of switch between the different stocks and see the stocks update. Yeah, the full application simply works, and it was 3 steps. You also have capabilities to kind of manage these deployments. I can delete deployments. I can edit them. I can see the logs and so on. I won't go into too much detail on that. But really, this should give you an idea. It should be this simple to put an application into production. OK, so now I'm going to switch to kind of something else again. So deploying something to a server is difficult. So one thing we've kind of been working a lot on for Panel is, in many cases, you don't really need a server, right? Pyodide, if you're not aware, basically runs Python in the browser. And so that should be straightforward, too. So we've built that functionality into Panel in a number of ways. One of the easiest ones to demonstrate here are in our documentation. If you see our documentation, you can launch into JupyterLite, which is awesome. The folks at QuantStack did a great job porting Jupyter to the browser. But secondarily, you can also simply run the docs inside the docs. Why switch to a different view, right? This is already output you can run. This is now fetching Pyodide, installing kind of Panel, Bokeh, a few other libraries, and then actually rendering the live output. So here, for example, now when I drag this, right, this is now running Python in the browser, in the docs. It's also nice because this is actually using what's called a service worker, so all the libraries are cached. So if you install it once, it's actually cached all these libraries and you're not downloading, I don't know, 50 megabytes each time you run one of these. So that's pretty great. And that's also true. So if you're great for docs, right? Interactive docs are awesome. It really gets you. We always had the problem of kind of, you're in your docs, you have a bunch of interactive stuff, but it doesn't work. Like, why? So this is really exciting for us. Also, the JupyterLite integration is great. And then we have another functionality in Panel. You can deploy your application to a server. That's all good. But you can also simply convert your application to Pyodide. So that just takes your application, renders the outputs, and then embeds the code in the page. And so here is a page of kind of all of our examples converted to Pyodide. If I click on it, right, it does the same thing. It's now fetching all the libraries and executing this application. And again, all I had to do to make this happen was do Panel convert your application, and you get an HTML file out. Or if you want it kind of slightly more optimized, you get 2 files out, which is your application, and a JavaScript file, which runs in a web worker. Not going to go into details of that either. But that's also pretty exciting to be able to kind of run applications entirely in your browser, no server required. And again, friction is incredibly low. The code that you wrote for your server deployment will work as long, there's some caveats, of course, right? Network problems, there is certain libraries just aren't compiled for WASM yet, and so that's a problem. But there's very smart people working on these things, and there's a really bright future here as well. All right, so yeah, check out our new docs. This is still the dev website. We're going to launch. I was hoping to have Panel 1.0 out before this. It's probably going to be late this week, early next week. But yeah, all this, we've kind of done a full overhaul of the documentation. It's now all interactive, with some caveats, of course, again. But yeah, we're super excited about it. And that will launch sometime next week. Okay, let's go to the last slide here. Thank you all. It's been really a pleasure talking at conferences again. Visit us at the Anaconda booth. It's somewhere up there in the corner. Or join the community. Basically, we have a discourse where you can ask questions or simply introduce yourself. We also have a Discord where you can chat with us. And check out Maxime's talk next door in a minute. Pretty excited about that, too. Thanks. Any questions? Yep, up there. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, in one part of my talk, I published something and what happens to the kernel. I have to ask for one clarification. Which part? It's the deployment? Here. Okay, yeah, this is not sharing kernels, so it's basically every user gets a new session. It is one Python process, or there will be kind of some scaling options. But it's all, each user gets their own session, which is somewhat lighter weight than a kernel, right? It's still the same process. which means it doesn't have to re-import Python and all the libraries. It's relatively quick to come back up, right? And that's actually something we've also worked on quite a bit for this release. It used to be kind of to serve a session, a panel session. Basically, what would happen is it would have to run through the entire thing and then give you the initial page. There's now an option to kind of say, store the initial session and then show that. And then when the WebSocket connects, basically you're displaying the loading screen while the WebSocket connects. And so you get something on the screen immediately, which was kind of a big problem for Panel before. So that's a big difference. Yeah, Vidar? Mm-hmm. Indeed. Okay. The question was, for the interactive wrapper around the Pandas API, how hard would it be to extend that to something else? In theory, it's a generic wrapper that simply intercepts all getAtter and setAtter calls. And so it should, in theory, if you patch it onto some other object, it should work. There's obviously some rough edges. I'm still considering rewriting the entire thing to make it more extensible. But in theory, you should be able to try and just take this interactive object and patch it onto something and see what happens. Basically, yeah, each method call will get intercepted. It'll analyze, is this a widget that you're passing in, or is it just a static value? And then kind of rerun the pipeline as you're building it. So in Panel, we have built-in OAuth components. So if you have an OAuth provider, I don't know, GitHub, Azure, Okta, that's built in. You should be able to add that just by setting up the kind of issuing a new OAuth ID for your app, and then configure that. If you need something custom, it's not too hard to add if it's OAuth based. We're still thinking about kind of some of the other, I don't know, LDAP or some of the other auth providers. So if you have interest, come chat. Yep.
I'm curious about the general adoption of Panel, and just have you found particular disciplines have found this form of interactive exploration particularly conducive to the workflows? Are you finding particular user groups or anything like that?
That's interesting. Yeah. So there's kind of a disconnect between the actual consulting we do and kind of the community we've built, right? On the consulting side, we have financial clients, we have manufacturing clients, and so on. On the open source community side, though, the Pangeo community adopted it pretty early on. I don't know if you're aware of them. They're mostly atmospheric scientists, oceanographers. I can never say that word. And so among that, particularly because we have such tight integration with Xarray, which, if you're not familiar, is kind of a pandas for gridded data. And so we have really powerful tools for plotting kind of large grids, re-rasterizing them. And so that community is a standout, in my opinion. All right, sounds like that's it. Thanks for everyone's time.